we have a 1998 Chevy Silverado with a 350 Vortec V8, and it's here, was towed here for a no start cold condition. It'll start up if you plug it in. Looks like it's got two block heaters in it. If you plug it in and warm it up, it'll start. So I think it's got a fuel pump, fuel pressure problem. So I've got a fuel pressure gauge hooked to the pressure port on the rail, and we're going to check fuel supply pressure here while we try to start this vehicle. Now this thing needs at least 55 pounds of fuel pressure to run, and these were prone to injector issues, and the spider inside the intake manifold with the injectors on it would tend to stick and not respond. Now this vehicle has been sitting for some time, so that could be the cause here. So we'll have a look. So I'm going to cycle the key on. We're going to watch what the initial fuel pump prime pressure is. Well, it went up to 55, but it's not holding pressure at all. And I know my gauge isn't leaking. So that's either a faulty fuel pump or a faulty pressure regulator. Unfortunately, though, we'd have to put a block-off valve on the fuel return line. Let's see if it'll go. So I'm going to try a little trick. So here's what I'm going to try. I've got a propane bottle and a small hose connected to the PCV fresh air inlet. So I'm going to introduce some propane while it's cranking and see if we can get it to run. If I recall correctly, these things will run with about 45-50 pounds of fuel pressure, but they won't start. So this is a bit of a challenge to do with only one hand here. See if I can set this up. No, I'm going to have to reach through the... Yeah, I'll get set up. So hopefully we can do this with one hand out through the door opening here, and one hand on the key. Be nicer with an assistant. Let some propane in there and then try We got 55 pounds of fuel pressure once it's running. Now we got to figure out what we need, if it's a fuel pressure regulator or a fuel pump. Now that the truck is warm, I had it running outside for a few minutes, so I was making room in the shop. We got 60 pounds of fuel pressure, and it holds just fine. So we're at a loss now whether this is a fuel pump problem and the fuel pressure is leaking back via the check valve in the fuel pump, or if it's a fuel pressure regulator that's failing when it's cold. Like I said, we really need to have a block off on the return line to pinch off the return line, but these have got rigid steel pipes going up to the fuel rail on the engine, and so there's no place to put a block off fitting in there, not conveniently anyways. I'm going to look underneath the side of the truck and see if the hoses on the side of the fuel pump have been changed. Maybe I can get a pair of pinching pliers in there to pinch off the return line. But there's no point doing anything right now because it's holding fuel pressure just perfectly. So I'm going to let this sit till tomorrow morning, leave it in the shop. It's quitting time today, and we'll see what happens in the morning. Hopefully it's, even though it's at room temperature, it'll be cool enough to act up. Well, that's not going to be very helpful. I cycled the key this morning, 58 psi, and it's holding now. Cycle it on again. Yeah, it's going to start just fine this morning. Or maybe not. As soon as that... Seems like the pump can't keep up. Well, I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to block off the return line, because it's either the fuel pressure regulator is letting the fuel pressure go back prematurely, or the pump can't
produce the pressure in the first place. And unfortunately there's no flexible hoses at the engine compartment here where we can pinch them off and restrict the return to check the regulator. So underneath the truck here, because this here are the two fuel lines. The larger line is the supply line, the return line is this one. I thought these were braided steel, but on this truck they're actually neoprene. So I'm going to use a pair of hose pinching pliers to pinch off this return line. And if it now builds and holds pressure fine, that means it's the pressure regulator that's leaking back to the tank prematurely. If it still has low fuel pressure, that means it's a fuel pump failure. So I'm going to get a pair of pliers for this. So there's the pinching pliers on there. You could use a pair of needle nose vice grips and a piece of cardboard on either side, just so you don't cut the hose, but these are specifically designed for pinching off hoses. So let's try it again with the hose pinching pliers in there. No, it needs a fuel pump. So I've got the return line pinched off completely, and the pump can't produce enough pressure to supply the engine to run. All right, well, we got to decide if we're going to pull the tank out of this thing or pull the box off. So we're looking underneath this truck to evaluate whether it's going to be better to pull the box off this thing. Is that missing a cap bolt here? That's weird. I'm sure there's supposed to be a bolt there. I was right. There is supposed to be a bolt there. Oh well. Yeah, it's missing a cab bolt. I see a ground strap off the box to the frame. I think that was off the filler neck. Yeah, that was off the filler neck. That's for anti-static. Now these fuel straps look pretty iffy. The fuel tank doesn't look bad. I'm sure it's been changed. But taking the box off this thing is not going to be a good option. Looking at these bolts here. Yeah, those bolts aren't coming out. So I think we stick with Plan B, removing the box. This is another iffy proposition here, looking at this brake line. Somebody's obviously replaced this already once, and maybe it should be time to do it a second time, including the brake hose here, as well as these rear lines on the axle housing. Oh boy, if we're going to have the tank out, that's the time to do that line because it runs behind the tank. It's been undercoated several times, so it doesn't look bad up here. Where did they tee in that line? Well, I'm going to have a little talk with this guy, because we're going to need a strap for sure. It's time to do some other work on here if he's seriously considering keeping this thing. So there's the fuel tank out of this thing. Because I'm changing the entire pump, I cut the ground wire so that it's easier to get at from the inside of the frame. I cut the fuel pipes off because they're rusty anyways. I had to cut the hose clamps because I couldn't loosen them with a screw. Well, actually I was able to loosen this one. It came loose, but the other ones out here wouldn't come off. I had to use easy outs on the nuts on the frame here. Need new straps, but run into a problem. The fuel pump that I got is not the correct pump. And researching the reason for it is this is actually a 97, not a 98. 98 had the plastic pump, 97 had the metal pump that you could service just by changing the pump, not by changing the whole assembly. So I've had to order another pump, and luckily it is in stock in town, so I can get it. Here we are underneath the truck, and there is that brake line, and it's compromised here, but it's also compromised right in here, as you can see. But up here further along the frame, it's in pretty decent shape, so I'm going to find a good spot further up the frame here and cut into it. Fuel lines don't look too bad. I should be able to get these fittings apart. And of course that ground bolt is right there. And we'll tie up these wires that go up to his roof lights or his rack lights. We'll put a new brake line in here while we're here. Obviously a new gas tank strap. Wow. Wasn't looking forward to a drive to town to pick up a fuel pump, but that's what we got to do. So there's the brake line spliced in. You can see in front of it, it's in pristine shape. And I checked it all the way to the front, it's good shape. So I replaced that line, secured it along the frame, got a new brake hose. Now I noticed a couple other things that were wrong. That vent hose was busted off here, so I fixed that vent hose. I had to make a lock nut for the brake hose because it doesn't come with it. So I just cut a fitting, replaced the rear brake lines. Had to heat the bleeder screws to remove them and drill them out because they were plugged full of rust. So we're ready to reassemble the gas tank now. Got the new fuel pump. Anyways, we're making progress here. So there's the replacement pump assembly. I'll post the number, part number. It's a complete assembly. Now this pump can be replaced separately, but you end up having to buy the sending unit because the lines are rotten, and the hold down clamp, or the hold down ring, and then the pump. By the time you buy that, you're better off to buy the whole assembly like this. Now this doesn't have a reservoir around the pump. The reservoir is actually in the bottom of the tank. So you need to look at that plastic piece to make sure it's still secure, because I've seen those PAL nuts, clips break loose, and then that plastic baffle will start floating around in there and it'll knock the pump off. It'll interfere with the float operation. So the newer ones, of course, are more modularized. So this is the actual reservoir around a new pump. As I said, I got the wrong one earlier because for some reason I had ID'd this as a 1998 when it's actually a 97. So we're going to get ready to put it in. Also checked inside the tank to see if there's any signs of dirt in there, and it looks pretty clean. As if there's sand or dirt in the bottom of the tank, it's going to wreck the new fuel pump. There's the pump going in this one, but they're different depending on the size of the tank and the length of the truck box. This is an extended cab short box with a 25-gallon tank, so that's the pump it takes. So there's the new pump installed in the tank, and the hose is transferred over. New hose clamps are going on here. This pipe that goes from here to the filler neck is steel, and it's rusted through, so I'm going to replace it with a piece of copper tube. And fill the ring surface area with some rubberized undercoating. Let's have a look at what I did underneath here. I got a new strap in here, and I've sprayed the inside of the frame rail. I don't want to spray the bottom of it until I'm finished putting the tank in, because I'll be getting myself covered with undercoating. Anyways, just to slow down Mother Nature a little bit. So there's that vent pipe by the filler neck, and I replaced it with a piece of copper tubing, or copper, half-inch copper pipe. Should be fine. New clamps. Fixed that ground on the filler neck with a hose clamp. It was originally spot welded. Now I'm going to undercoat these straps, but at first I want to start this thing and make sure that the fuel pump works great before I spray undercoating all over everything. So I'm about to start this thing for the first time, so it's going to take a bit for the fuel pump to prime. Might take a couple of cycles. That was pretty quick. Let's try it one more time. And let's see how it starts. Well, I'm going to leave the fuel pressure gauge on it, put it outside, start to cold tomorrow morning just to be safe. But it holds pressure at 60 pounds now, like it should. Well, we'll make sure there's no leaks. We'll bleed the brakes now.
and put it outside. So here's the setup for pressure bleeding this thing. I like to pressure bleed the brakes after changing lines like that, because this master cylinder has been moving a certain travel, and pedal bleeding is going to push it into an area where it hasn't been before, and I don't want to disturb anything in there. Also, when I took this cover off, this bladder was out of position and it was down inside the reservoir, so it was basically not there. The brake fluid was all black, probably contaminated with moisture because it's hygroscopic, so it absorbs water from the atmosphere. So I drew all the brake fluid out of the system, and I'm going to flush the system with the bleeder ball. That's pressurized to 25 psi, and we open this fitting here, and it's pushing the brake fluid into the master cylinder ports, and we just go open the bleeder screws now. So here we're going to bleed this side. Put the wrench in here. I've already opened the bleeder screws and cleaned them. And basically you just let the brake fluid run. You can catch it in the can here so it's not on the floor. Till there's no signs of air. I've already bled the other side, so this one was quick because it's just the left side line. Start at the furthest wheel from the brake master cylinder, and then work your way closest. So it'll be right rear, right front, left front. That would be the order on this vehicle. And when there's nice clean brake fluid coming out, as there is now, close the bleeder screw. And you're basically done when you're done all four wheels.
Okay, so we're out here this morning with a cold start. It's -4 this morning and windy. You can see the snow on the hood. It's pretty cool. Initial pump. Well, let's say it's fixed. Thanks for watching.